Explore the history, relationships, expertise, and data that go into ensuring Stine growers get maximum yield potential. This is the Stine Seedcast. Here's your host, David Thompson.
Hello, I'm David Thompson, National Marketing and Sales Director for Stine Seed Company, and this is the Stine Seedcast, a bi-weekly show where Stine growers, agronomists, and other special guests exchange product knowledge and agronomic expertise and discuss everything that goes into maximizing yield. Today we've got Myron Stine, president of Stine Seed Company. Myron loves to get out in the country and talk to growers all around the United States. Myron, tell us who we're going to be hearing about today.
Well, today, David, we're going to talk to Ryan Christopherson. And Ryan Christopherson's in southwest Minnesota. And one thing Ryan has done is he's taken the Stine high performance, shorter statured, high population genetics, and he's utilized the traits or the qualities of those genetics to maximize his yields on his farm. And so we're going to talk to Ryan. We're going to discover what different things he's done to hit these high yield numbers that he's had the number of years he's had while working with Stine.
Great. And I've had the opportunity to listen to this interview, and I love the fact he really takes a real systems approach to, like you said, putting these products in the right place under the right environment to really maximize potential. So let's get started to see with the interview.
Hello, we're here today in southwest Minnesota with Ryan Christopherson. We're going to learn about 95 to 108-day hybrids and learn about Ryan's techniques on managing those hybrids on your farm here in Minnesota. So let's talk some about the farm. It's a fifth generation farm. Tell us the history behind it. How a little bit about. I know you were in the military for a while. You came back to the farm. Tell us all about that. Story.
I grew up just a quarter mile down the road, and where I live now is our family's farm where we homesteaded. And my great-grandpa emigrated from Norway, great-great-grandpa. So I'm the fifth generation. My great-grandpa built here, my grandpa grew up here, and my dad grew up here. So I left, I graduated from Clarkfield High School, and I left, and I went into the Naval Academy. And there I graduated with a mechanical engineering degree and went into flight school. After that, I initially flew a reconnaissance plane, and after that I went into F-14s, and I flew F-14s. And later in the Air Guard F-16s for 5 deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. So I spent the better part of 20 years, right at 20 years in the military, and came back here in 2003 and basically started farming with my father. So we're about as blue and tried and blue in the agriculture as you could possibly be.
Sure. So, and as a pilot, there's something you do on your farm that a lot of farmers do not do. And let's talk about that as far as your applicating.
Yeah, so this year we added a spray plane business, and myself and a partner of mine started a turbine spray plane up business from scratch, and that's really not for the faint of heart. We went through the entire state of Minnesota licensing process, the FAA licensing process. I left the military with multiple thousands of hours and almost 400 aircraft carrier landings, but I hadn't flown in 10 years, and I didn't have any ag time, and I didn't have any tail dragger time. So basically I had to just jump in and there's no real mechanism to start with zero time and jump in a turbine airplane for ag, because most people that have the kind of time I have don't go fly spray planes, So what we found was with this high yield system, if you don't control every single operation all the way through, you pull one operation out, you're not getting the benefit of the entire system. So it's very important to have the right timing on the fungicide as well as the insecticide on the soybeans and get a good job done. So the only way I could really control that was by doing it myself.
Do it yourself.
And I started on November 2nd with the process, and on July 15th we got our certificate from the FAA, and we started spraying on July 21st. So it took a long time. I mean, it was very technically difficult to get that up and running.
And you had to get your tail dragger.
I had to get my tail dragger. I mean, I hadn't flown for quite a while, and so I had to get all my quals back. I had to get all my military time transferred into the civilian world. And it isn't so simple. But that's kind of what we're learning. If you're going to go into what we're doing, you pretty much have to control the quality from start to finish. There's no area where you can leave to chance.
Your comment on 9714, for instance, is fungicide and insecticide and being very timely with that to assure that you have a good stand or a remaining stand at harvest is essential.
Yeah. So what we're doing is we're protecting yield potential with fungicide and insecticide. So that's kind of what we're really after is protecting what we have out in the field. It does give you a yield benefit, but it varies hybrid by hybrid. But if you don't protect it, you don't get it in the combines. Everything else you do makes no difference.
Yeah. Let's discuss some important aspects of what you do on managing Stine hybrids on your farm. And you do some very unique things relative to some other farms out there. The first thing comes down to a yield goal. So how do you set your yield goal, or what does that mean to you at this point?
Our yield goal, we're targeting 250 bushel average on our fields right now. And our yield goal is set up by the Iowa State calculation of harvested ears in stand, times your rows around, times your length of your kernel, divided by roughly 65 to 110,000 kernels per bushel. So when we look at a hybrid, our main goal is repeatability. And we're taking these Stine hybrids, putting them in your higher population setting, and that's kind of how we set our 250 bushel average. So once we hit our 250 bushel average over our farm, then we're going to set another goal of 300 bushel. And what we're finding out is some of the newer numbers, as we're able to push the varieties and push the maturities and push the population, we're starting to see some fields hit our yield goal.
Okay, and when you talk about that yield goal, you've mentioned to me before that that means you have to have areas on your farm that are over 300 bushel, probably to have that 250 bushel yield goal. Is that correct? Or
that is correct. That's the difficulty. So as we push our populations, we push our inputs. Now all of a sudden we're seeing a point where we're getting a maximum amount of inputs and a maximum yield. So a lot of the getting high bushels, a lot of it is raising up the lower averages, because like we discussed earlier, to get a 250 bushel yield goal, you have to have just as many acres at 300 bushel as you do at 200. So you can't have anything under 200 bushel an acre, or you're not going to be able to hit those higher numbers. And not to say we don't hit that as an average over every single field, but that's what we're pushing towards. And as we incorporate new management techniques every year, it's one thing to hit a yield goal like that over a quarter or 80 acres, but it's another to do it over several thousand acres. And what we're looking for is repeatability and reliability is primarily what we're looking for.
Sure. Okay, so you set your yield goal. Tell me, on seed bed preparation, is there anything special you do there, or?
Well, it's the old standby of making sure that, you don't go out on the field too early, but the preparation starts the year before with the tillage before, and it starts with what shape your field is in for drainage, because the drainage sets everything, right off the bat. If you have low quality drainage, you can't go after these big yields.
Sure, okay. Is there anything else you think we need to discuss about the secrets of growing high yielding corn?
Well, I guess it's like I've said this a couple of times, it's attention to detail. No detail can be left that can't be investigated and benefited. Because if you look at that equation we talked about, you've got your final stand times your kernel around times your length, but then you divide that by the kernels per bushel. So we're attacking all of those all at the same time. We start with something that'll give us at least 16 rows around at V6. And then at tassel, we're giving the plant everything it needs so it'll pollinate the kernels. And then at planting, we have hopefully the final stand, that we're going to take into harvest, and then we protect that final stand. And then as we make more passes, and as our management gets higher and higher, and we target test weight, and we target different things, basically we're trying to take that from 85 or 90,000 kernels per bushel down to 75,000. So we're going at the entire equation on every single level, basically. And that's the only way you can get to high yield, because you can't have any spots in your field below 200 bushel.
And tell us, so on 9655, it's a 108-day hybrid, and you can have test weight issues here with that hybrid, right?
Yeah.
If you get an early frost.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about what you do to mitigate those issues.
Sure.
What you've learned in the past.
So last year, right now on September 7th, this 108-day corn is half black layer. We were out in the field earlier. We looked at some of these. Mm-hmm. So last year on September 16th, we got a frost that killed the corn basically from the ear and up. Mm-hmm. And we were very lucky because with the high population, we had a very large plant mass. And when it killed the plant from the ear up, there was still enough left from the ear and down that was green in order to fill it. So we ended up with 9714. So fungicide is one of the things that keeps a lot of moisture in a plant, and a plant with a lot of moisture is much more difficult to freeze. And a plant with a field with a huge amount of plant mass, it's much more difficult to freeze. So what we found with the 9714, it was a little less plant mass. We were a little bit lighter on the test weight, but the 9655 filled with what was in the stock, and we were able to still get 60-pound test weight. So, the further north you go, the more variable it is, and I would say we're probably about on the edge of growing 108, 109-day corn, but we're still able to do it. And if we can reduce our variability, that will give us higher probability of success.
Yeah, that's amazing what you're doing with some of these later hybrids. So Ryan, you talk about growing high population corn, it's attention to details. Mm-hmm. Not just on how you manage the corn, but on how you really manage your equipment. You manage everything on your farm. Can you give us an example, just like a
Sure.
small example of something you do, and it's a minute item, but it makes a big deal in the whole scheme of things.
Sure. Growing high population, high volume corn, there's no one thing that you're going to do that's just going to give you 50 bushel. It's 10 or 15 things that give you a little bit or preserve a little bit. So with farming, I believe the farm finance system is about 15 to 20 years behind where it should be because everything is a one-year cash flow. So if you spend more on inputs, it has to give somewhere. So our goal has been to take money long-term out of our equipment by keeping our equipment running longer. Plus, if you keep spending more and more money on equipment, what good does a high population do you with more yield? So if you spend more to get more, you've got a big problem. And then the 1 year you don't get more, it's disastrous. Yeah. So what we've done with our equipment is set up essentially a military-style preventive maintenance program where we fluid sample, rebuild on schedule, and then when we rebuild, we take components and we'll a lot of times rebuild them to higher specifications and quality than the OEM parts. And for example, the sickle blades over there, we got tired of getting 5-foot chunks of sickle blades in, and when they do, they bevel them and then put a sickle on top, and it always breaks where the bevel is. So we actually imported from Germany the sickle bar, and we've got a 3D mill there where we put the sickle bars in and drilled our own holes. And now essentially for 1/8 the cost, we have unlimited sickles. And that in itself is really no big feat, but if you replicate that and multiply that by 100, basically all these things add up. So we went from $800 or $900 or $1,000 per sickle bar down to less than 100. And if we keep doing that over the span of the machine, what it does is it lowers our cost. It's the same with the 3D mill. When we have bad bearing blocks or we have something that needs to be fixed, a lot of times the parts aren't available now. So we'll actually make the part with our 3D printer, or with our 3D mill.
Yeah, I think those small details are what make the difference on your farm being profitable and looking into the future. All those things. That makes all the difference.
Well, a good example would be our fertilizer floater. High wear item, a lot of corrosion. It's a difficult piece to keep running. So we rebuilt one at 6 years, and the first rebuild was about $120,000. And I bought another machine and I rebuilt it, and they're identical machines. But the second rebuild I did was under $30,000. And when you have a floater ripped apart in here with 10,000 pieces and it's laying on the floor and everything's tore apart, we build back better basically by putting in hydraulic hoses that have abrasion resistance 300 times greater than the OEM. So we never have a hydraulic failure anymore because we don't have the hoses break. The rubber breaks a little bit, the fertilizer gets in the steel braids, and then the hose blows apart. We don't have that anymore. We haven't had a down day with a floater in probably 6 years, and my floater is 12 years old. And we just figure out ways to keep doing rebuilds. And as we rebuild, we increase the quality of our components and lower our cost at the same time. But if we don't control our dry fertilizer and we don't have the timing of it and we can't store our fertilizer, it's very difficult to enter into a high yield system, basically, because that's one of the things that you need to control.
All these things really, they're almost an art. Farming's almost an art at the end of the day. So.
Well, we treat our equipment as a program. And we've had discussions about the military. When they buy a piece of equipment, they don't just buy a piece of equipment and say, well, hope the dealer has parts. You're in the middle of the ocean and you are days and days and days away from getting any part. And we'd fly, the first Tomcat would fly on and it would go down to the hangar bay and it would just be taken apart. There'd be a wheel laying and a canopy laying and all the parts would come off it and they would go to support the other airplanes. So at the end of a 6-month or an 11-month cruise, when they put it back together, we all did rock, paper, scissors as who'd fly that thing off the first time, because it's essentially a whole new airplane. And we kind of have that mindset here where we have an expeditionary mindset with what we have when we start a season is what we have on site. And that's what we rely upon. Anything we can get in is a bonus and it's helpful, but we don't count on anything that isn't on site when we start a season. And that's proving to be an awfully large benefit now in the area of the stressed global supply chains and not being able to get equipment. I didn't realize how important it would be to operate on an island, but that's what's happening now in agriculture.
Sure. So Ryan, tell us, we have to know, tell us your lowest field average of corn since you've been farming, and then your highest field average on corn.
Well, as you know, we've been planting Stine for the better part of 6 or 7 years, and we were extremely frustrated getting hybrids that were variable, that we didn't have the knowledge and engineering data behind them. So one of the things that I've appreciated most is looking at some of the numbers that you give me so I know how to place those hybrids previously. Mm-hmm. So in the last couple of years, we've had some larger fields, half sections, 320s. I've had one of them go in excess of 250. However, about 10 years ago, it wasn't Stine corn, but we had that same corn go 220 on one quarter and under 100 on another. And it was a failure of the hybrid. It was a specific lot. So with a high population, high input system, we value, first we have to quantify it, we have to measure it. And then once we measure it, we can assess why this happened and why that happened. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't do us any good if we have 250 on one field and 150 on another, because that's a 200 bushel average. So the repeatability of high yields across the field to field to field is what we're striving for. If I spend more money in a high input, high yield, high environment system, if I don't get it back, I've just traded one problem for another. So our whole goal has been to reduce the cost of our inputs because we're putting more inputs on, and then get more consistent yields. And we've all had fields that are within a mile or two of each other, 40, 50 bushel more. And we're quantifying why that is on a lot of those spots. So that's the whole trick with this high yield system, is to get repeatable high yields. It isn't to get the one-offs. I mean, if we hit a grand slam, that's fantastic, but if I strike out 3 times as much, my average is lower or below. And that is one of the limiting factors on the high input, high yield system, is you have to have a lot more attention to detail. And you have to know what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yeah. Then on planting date, anything on planting date?
Yeah, my great-grandpa used to say, if you can pull your pants down and sit in the dirt, that's just about right. So 50 degrees, he was about a 47-degree guy, but he could tolerate that, you know. But as far as the last couple of years, we've had some snow and some after planting, so we target right about that 50 degrees. If we're getting in the field too much before, now we're just risking our stand. And as far as the yield goal goes, the stand is about 75% of your final yield. So if you have a poor stand, if you have 50% stand, you're already basically, 35% is as good as you're going to get towards your yield goal. So we're very cautious and we're very careful when we plant. We also look at the 5 and 10 day forecast to make sure we're not going to dip back down and get some snow. But clearly, the earlier the better. We're pushing some 107 and 109 day hybrids up here. So we obviously have to get in the field as fast as we can.
All right.
Without harming our stand.
And then so nitrogen application. So we've talked about that some in the past, but what are you doing?
We're doing fall ammonia. The new Minnesota rules have come out, and we're west of a lot of the areas that are going to be limited for fall application. So we're doing a split application of ammonia in the fall, and then we come back in the spring with some urea on top. So we're trying to get the plant growth. As you know, at V6, your kernels around are set at V6. So we're hoping at V6 that plant has plenty of nitrogen and has all the nutrients we need, so it doesn't limit us on the kernels around. Because you wouldn't think when the corn is 6-8 inches high that's going to be a portion of a yield component, but it is.
That's huge.
So if we end up at 14 around instead of 18 around, you're going to take off 150 kernels or so per cob.
Okay. So then on population is probably without a doubt the biggest thing you focus on here.
Yeah.
And what you think is probably the future of growing corn and getting high yields.
So we we probably met, 7, maybe 8 years ago, and we've been all Stine now for probably 5 years, and we've had dozens of hours of conversations about hybrids, the height, the plant height, the ear height. So what we're after, essentially, is moving our population up from the low 30s where we were several years ago. My father's been narrow row, higher population for probably the better part of 25 years. He started this system. But the problem was we didn't have the corn. The corn was 15, 18 feet high in some spots where they're really, when you go narrow row, your corn gets to be much higher than it would normally be. So the traditional hybrids weren't working for us because they were getting too tall and the ear placement was too tall. Also, what we're really targeting is roughly 600 kernels per cob. If we get much over 600 kernels per cob, then we have a difficulty getting the cob in the combine. The yield might be out there, but we don't actually see it. So what we're after is, something along the lines of, some of these hybrids like 9655 here, that's 16 around and 36 long. So we have about 576 kernels on there. So we want to see the 40s, low 40s, mid 40s, and that's what's pushing our yield at that point. But that comes with a whole nother thing so we can support 45,000, plants out there. What we don't want to find is a gigantic ear that has 800 kernels on that stands until the 5th of September and then falls down before we get it in the combine. That's why we've kind of steered away from the wide flex hybrids of what a lot of other companies are offering. And that's why we've kind of moved to the more moderate flex. But then you have to make sure your population is high enough, and you have to be careful for planting, and you have to make sure you have good high quality seed. Because any one of those things allows you, or any one of those things stops you from getting a good stand, you're right there. Everything else you do after that is marginal at best.
And then, so when you look at these hybrids, you have 9545, 9546, 9714, 9655. Yeah. And you had a comment earlier about this 9545, which both of these hybrids, we had a limited supply of them last year. They're newer genetics. A number of the newer hybrids we have coming out are similar to these hybrids. So tell us a little bit about what you've learned about this 9545 relative to, say, the 9714.
Sure. Going a step further back, the first number we saw from Stine that really gave us the yield punch that we were looking for was 9538. And that was a little bit wider flex on the rows around, but it pretty much stayed constant at 36, but we could flex to 20. Now, 9655 is kind of a continuation of that with real heavy test weight. What we're seeing out in the field right now at 9655 is 16 around by 36, which is giving us about 576 kernels. So if we have a final stand of 30,000, that's giving us right around 200 bushel. So every 1,000 stand we have is roughly 7 bushel. So if we want to punch over the 250 range, we need to be up well over 35, 36,000. So if we have a final stand right around 40,000 with this number, we can start to push those numbers quite a bit. 9714, so we've planted 9655 and 9714. We've planted that for probably 4 years now. And 9714 has really been a tremendous number for us. For us, it's topped out vicinity of 40,000. So we're seeing some really tremendous yields, but these two numbers got us to where we want to be now. But the new genetics with what we've seen out of 9545 and 9546, they're kind of pushing in the direction that we want to go. Because I believe within a handful of years, we're going to be able to take these numbers well into the mid 40s is kind of what I believe. This is the first year we've had them, so we're still learning about them, but that's why you've been on our farm now for 4 years with your plots. And in general, you've pretty much doubled your size every year. So that's kind of why we wanted Stine here, was to take a look at our ground, see our management techniques, and see what we're doing, because we wanted to actually help determine in the direction that Stine moved with their hybrids, because this is what we're trying to see. For example, 9545, that's 16 by 36, so that's the same size cob as 9655, but it's about 3 feet shorter. The ear placement is about 2 feet shallower. We need to look at the test weight, but if we can take that population well over mid 40s, we're going to be pushing 270 to 280. Now, 9546 is the same. It's a little bit less girthy. It's only 14 around, but it's 42 long. So we actually have 12 more kernels on this year than we do on 9545. And this is also a very short hybrid with a very short ear placement. So these are these are where we want to be, the size of the ears that we want. We just need to take them. This is our first year. We didn't have I only had a couple boxes of each one. But these are the style of hybrids that are going to allow us to push in the higher population, which is going to then determine our starting point of the yield. So if we plant higher populations, we still have to support these hybrids and fill them. And that's kind of where the true art comes in, is how to take what you give the farmers and how to turn them into 250 bushel plus. Because if you take any one of these numbers and plant in the high 20s to low 30s, you're probably not going to be overly enthused, because that's not what these are for.
You'll be pleasantly, or you'll be very unsatisfied.
Yeah, that's not what these are for at all.
Right. So, Ryan, what about singulation at planting at these higher populations?
It's very, very important. We run planters that are mainly stock, but have the insides in to give us extremely high population. We run through all our meters every year, and if we're not in the 99.5 percentile before we leave the shop, then we change it out. We have extra meters on hand, so we don't fix anything in the field anymore. We just slap another row unit on it and we get going. But with the high population, high volume system, if you pull any one of 20 different things out of it, the whole system falls apart. So the very first thing that we need is extremely high quality seed with high germination and then a high singulation. If we lose a lot of the population right off the bat due to any one of 10 things, then we have trouble, So for everything you do, there's something good and something bad, because these ears are moderate flex. Some of the earlier numbers that you were using for high population were almost fixed. Like we talked about, 9540 was basically 14 around by 32, and I looked at thousands of ears and it would never flex. And that was a fine number up to a certain yield goal, but that wasn't a number that we could take and push. So without a very wide flex on these ears, you're limited to make sure you have enough population. So singulation, and we've talked about that probably 3-4 hours this year, right? Earlier, the singulation and high quality seed. If you don't have that, you can't even start the system.
Sure.
Basically.
Yeah. So if you look at these all the hybrids you planted this year, out of everything, if you pick 2 different Stine hybrids that are your favorite to manage on your farm, and
well, I would be 9714 and 9655, only because we planted them for a couple years, and I know exactly how to position them. I believe that 9546 and 9545 will be the style that we move forward with. But being as it's a first year, you need to get them, make sure they stand, make sure the test weight's good. Sometimes just getting them off the cob, the dry down, it's the whole deal. But right now, the 9714 has been our highest yield, and the 9655 is, with enough population, the 9655 is right on its heels.
And you probably like the 9714's plant stature.
I do.
Best.
I do.
Shorter.
It's a little bit lighter on the test weight and a little bit harder to get off the cob, but the 9655 doesn't flex quite as much. So they both have their idiosyncrasies on how you coax that last 5 to 10% out. For example, the 9714 responds well to fungicide. So if we can give that stay green and we can give that plant everything it needs at the very end, then the 9714 gives you that last little bit. Whereas the 9655, which is 1 day later, it dries down faster and has higher test weight, but it doesn't always respond to some of the increased inputs the way the 9714. The 9714's just got a little bit more top end in some of those spots where it flexes to give you the top end.
Great, yeah. I would call that yield plus performance.
Oh, that's bad.
Did you like that?
That can't be in there.
I like it.
Yeah.
It's definitely going to get the attention of
They'll take that out of there.
Sure.
I just had to do that.
Yeah. I love that.
That's to make all them happy.
Laughing.
I'll bring your coffee right here real quick.
Sure.
Ryan, thank you very much for having me here today, and it's been a wonderful time. I always learn something, about farming and really a number of different topics when I visit with you.
Thank you for coming today, Myron. I appreciate it.
Well, that was Ryan Christopherson from Southwest Minnesota. Fantastic interview. There's a lot to love about what he talks about. Just a really, really innovative grower.
Absolutely. Ryan is all about the details in just about everything he does. He's a pilot. He was in the military. So every aspect of his farm, he focuses on the details. And in some cases, it's on cost. And in some cases, it's on management. And so he looks at his corn management technique as looking at these Stine genetics that he has, and then he says to himself, okay, how do I make sure I have consistency with those? And how do I consistently have each plant put so much grain on per plant and do that across my entire farm? He's not looking for a home run every so often. He's looking for a home run constantly. That's what Ryan has done. He's very good at it. He's a good example of someone that uses what I call super management to manage his high population Stine hybrids.
I think that's something we've talked about within our organization. I mean, certainly there's hybrids that are very adaptable and work well in a wide range of environments. But for those folks that are looking for that, again, that next level, it really is a systems approach, right? It's about all the things that go into that, from row spacing to population to fertility to tillage and all those things. And sounds like Ryan, is really getting it dialed in and is able to really maximize those genetics and starts to know what genetics is going to work for each field that he has, seems like.
A grower can take your old style hybrids and put those out there and then get okay yields, or you can take these new genetics and manage those with meticulous detail and get superior yields. That's what it comes down to.
Great. Well, for those tuned in, we've been talking with Myron Stine in his visit with Ryan Christopherson up in southwest Minnesota. Thanks for joining us today, Myron.
Well, thank you, David.
So we'll be back again 2 weeks from now with a new episode. Just to make sure you never miss an episode, we encourage you to subscribe to the Stine Seedcast wherever podcasts are found. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.
To learn more about Stine and its elite corn and soybean genetics, visit stineseed.com. Subscribe to the Stine Seedcast wherever podcasts are found. Stine has yield.